Hello, my name is Neil, and welcome to Silverthreads. Today on r/NoSleep, we will experience the tale of a doctor dedicated to his craft. Written by user Your Daily Devil, otherwise known as Paul Melio. I work for a veterinarian who never lets a dog die. I work for a veterinarian who never lets a dog die. And that's why people go to Dr. Collie. I mean, they'd go to him regardless, as the man looks as though he'd ought to be working at a candy store. The happiest, gentlest man, right down to the red bow tie. There's this important saying in our town, though, a bit of a joke, a bit of a warning. If you want your dog to live, you take him to Dr. Collie. But if you feel that it's the dog's time, that it's suffering greatly, take it behind the shed and do the deed yourself. Because he will never let a dog die. Under no circumstances. We have no pentobarbital. He smiled in response, almost proud of this statement, stroking a broken-winged bird as he did. And I was shocked. It was baseline and standard. The prettily named drug is an anti-seizure medication, bit outdated, that was discovered to simply shut off the brain when given in large doses. So it became the go-to for cats and dogs whose time had come. A gentle good night, all at a fairly cheap manufacturing cost. I hate to admit it now, but I did like working there. My previous clinics were sterile, fluorescent, utterly depressing. The doctors would mumble they did all they could, bitch over drinks afterwards about shitty cats or dog diarrhea. And while I know it came with the work, it was exhausting to be surrounded by exhaustion, you know? I can't stop comparing him to a candy store owner because that's what he was in every regard. Little boys and girls would bring in their gerbils and even fish. Pets that look rotten and half dead, mind you. And he'd pick them up in the merriest fashion and whisk them back to his office, a private little sunlit room lined to the brim with leather-bound books. Beautiful books, I must add. And if I ever made enough money, I promised myself I'd get a library just like it. All patched up, he announced, stepping from the surgical room, cradling a kitten. He tied it with a bow, color matching the most adorable cast. The pudgy little kitten purred, rubbing against him, and it was strange to see such picturesque perfection in the scene. The little girl sobbing with happiness as she took the kitten back in her arms. But more so, the creature behaving exactly how we wished they all would with us. With love, with warmth. Now you be careful with her now, he told the girl. That's my brave little girl you have there. And with a two-fingered pat on the kitten's head, he smiled as he watched the family depart. Do you have any children? I inquired casually one night as we were packing up. I do regret asking because he was far too blunt with me. He told me, not breaking his good spirit, that his late wife and him had tried multiple times, but were multiple times unsuccessful. He reflected for a moment, not in a sadness, but a bit more in a yearning, before inquiring about me, myself, in the most polite of ways. And that's how we carried on at Dr. Collie's, merry as always. The staff was few, but he joked he chose us because we loved dogs more than people. And he was right to an extent. After nasty breakups, I always had my beagle, Samwise, named for Lord of the Rings, which he lets me bring to work. God, I know everyone says their dog is the best dog, but you know, Sam truly is. He just knows. Like a magnet, he just attaches to me when I need it the very moment I need it, curled against me. I swear he watches shows along with me when I'm in a depressive state, and cures them by bouncing in the flower beds when I do eventually have to take them out. You've met this dog before in life. I'm sure you have. So stupid, so perfect. And the good doctor adores him, as do nearly all the visitors. Nearly being, well, where this story goes, because we all have the lions. It's not that we're a small town, but we're small enough that we still have our infamous. And the lions were every tragedy imaginable. With a mother who ran over a little girl in a drunk driving accident, a notoriously and publicly racist grandmother, a father who was unpleasant but no particular villain, and of course, the boys. 2 of them. Horrors, truly unclean little psychopaths who'd throw stones just to see what they'd break. And they'd come in with their old, withered dog. It was the most curious thing with Dr. Colley. He'd only address the dog, never them. It's like he smelled something foul on them. "And how's my favorite old boy?" He'd ask the dog, who would greet him like a long-lost friend. The poor thing. The poor, poor thing. This is where the doctor and I differed, because it truly did need to be put out of its misery, put down neatly and peacefully, as at this point it was in pain and just staggering on. But the doctor, he would never let a dog die. He'd retreat to his office with his books and his tools, and the dog would return quite merry. Merry, truly, the happiest, healthiest, and roundest it's looked in ages, tied with a nice little bow. And the boys would leash yank it away, bring it back to reality before the process would repeat. Those boys would recognize me out on the streets as they played street hockey with gnarled old sticks. "Little bitch," they'd call me, and Samwise would growl. Sam wasn't much of a fighter, but of course he was loyal, protective at all costs, even against these little monsters. "Do you like dogs more than people?" I mumbled to the doctor, after another day of watching the Lions boys drag their dog away. He looked at me as if I'd asked something as basic as if the sky were blue. Of course," he replied, and returned to his books. It happened in mid-October, a day gray with rain. The boys had beers with them, and I heard them smash in the streets like gunshots as I hurried past with Samwise. And I apologize I cannot go into too much detail, as it's painful to remember. But as they taunted, as they came near, Samwise treated this as a real threat. I begged him to come with me, to leave them. But those boys came closer, and I screamed at the 2 of them to stop. They did not. With a swift blow from a hockey stick, they smashed it over Samwise's skull. He fell with a whimper. They did it again, and again. I screamed as the neighbors came out, the boys laughing as they scampered away, sneakers clanking over the broken glass. Samwise was in pain. He whimpered, cried, but I could not let him die. So I took him to Dr. Colley, who would not let him. It was late when I called, blubbering. But the good doctor said he'd be in immediately. He asked what had happened, and I told him who did it. There was a pause, a long one. I broke it asking if he was still there, and he assured me he'd be in the office soon. I waited for nearly an hour on the twilight curb. At least it felt that long. A broken mess cradling Samwise. He fell in and out of consciousness, lapping me with his tongue. Lapping until he lost the energy, letting his tongue fall from his mouth as he whimpered. As I whimpered. I wondered when the doctor would arrive, if he had forgotten, but he did come. He came with 2 vintage suitcases, presumably with his tools. I fumbled for the door lock frantically, and he whisked the dog away into his study. Never had I witnessed the doctor this serious, this determined. "Let me work," he told me coldly, a coldness that was new to me. So I did. I wandered around the office, empty. The files and folders were still there, but the candy shop atmosphere felt almost mocking now, like holding a funeral in a nursery. It felt wrong and I hated it. Hated as the clock chipped time away. Hated as I could do nothing but wait. So I went in, and what I saw made me numb. Not scared, not horrified, no. A bit something beyond that. It was the Lyons boys. They were emptied. Emptied from throat to navel, only distinguishable by their clothes as their heads were not there. But inside there was nothing. No organs, just gutted chicken breast shells still dripping with wet meat, packed neatly into those 2 little suitcases. The good doctor noticed me enter, but said nothing. He was busy tying Samwise with a bow, and Samwise was well. Without a word, he closed the suitcases, zipping them tight, and retreated out back. And I was numb. Still too numb to even care for Samwise, who hopped off the desk as lively as the day he was born, licking me furiously, loving me. Thin hairline stitches, nearly unnoticeable but fresh. I noticed then the books. 2, a few misplaced. Leather-bound and beautiful. They were out of order, one on his desk. It was opened. It was also hollowed. A storage compartment. Storage for a jar. A jar with that smell of formaldehyde creeping from the pages it nestled in. And between it was a child. An almost child. A stillbirth. One of the countless that filled the volumes of the room, a collection of the doctor's attempts. A section of it had been taken from the tips of its skull, nipped, and I knew where it had gone. I looked down at Samwise, who looked up at me. The good Dr. Colley returned, exhausted then, in a slow radiance. A smile returned to his face. Not for me, but for Samwise. "Take a care of him," he told me. "He's like a son to me." If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Or you might get hollowed out and shoved into a suitcase. If you prefer the podcast format, I upload every episode to the Silverthreads podcast, available on most popular podcast platforms. If you have a story idea for me to read, or if you just have a business inquiry, email me at storiesforsilverthreads@gmail.com. Thank you all for listening, and I'll see you next time with another story.